She's lurking. Lurking.
We can take back like a house,
And I talked
the sheep.
Oh, my fault.
We can stop a lot of bad stuff, but when do we
it
get
off.
it back? I don't really see that happening.
Are we ready?
Yes, yes, yes.
All right. I call to order the Iowa City Conference Board meeting that is held between Johnson County Board of Supervisors, Iowa City City Council, and Iowa City Community School Board member. Today is Tuesday, February 18, 2020, and the time is right at 5 p.m. And I want to go ahead and do the roll call.
Iowa City Council members present. Burgess.
Here.
Mims.
Here.
Salih.
Yep.
Taylor.
Here.
Teague.
Here.
Thomas.
Here.
Weiner.
Here.
Johnson County Supervisors. Green Douglas.
Here.
Hayden. Porter. Reddick.
Here.
Sullivan.
Here.
Iowa City School Board. Eastham.
Here.
Wrestler. Malone. We do have a quorum. The school won't have a vote without two people, but
Okay, great, thanks. That was item number B. Moving on to item number C. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes for the January 21st, 2020 Conference Board meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by
Sullivan.
Sullivan. I think I actually said
County.
County.
Yeah.
County, and seconded by
City.
City of Iowa City.
Okay.
Any discussion on this? All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item number D, fiscal year 2021 budget. So are you going to kind of elaborate on this a little bit?
I could, basically, I presented the budget last month at our meeting. Kind of included in the cover letter what the different
Sure.
changes are. Don't really have any additional comments.
Okay.
I think.
Awesome.
Just need to open
Oh,
public hearing.
actually,
Okay.
one thing I did want to report back on from our first meeting, it was, the question came up whether our office is audited. I talked with our county finance director, and his answer is technically no. And here's what he said to me: the county is the fiscal agent for the city assessor's office, and we present some limited financial information in our annual financial report that reflects your year-end agency fund financial position, and a summary of the changes in your various assets, liabilities, and fund balance for the year. So technically, no.
But they're the fiscal agent, so that covers a lot.
Right, yeah, we don't handle any money in our office. We make claims, the auditor makes the payments
Okay.
once we've provided the proper documentation, and we don't collect taxes, the treasurer does that, so.
Great,
Thank you.
thanks. I'm going to open up the public hearing. And then, any discussion on the proposed budget after some of the things that were just mentioned? And is there anyone from the public that would like to address this topic? Seeing there is none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Could I have a motion to adopt fiscal year 2021 budget?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by City of Iowa City, seconded by the county. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item E, board comments. I know that you and I were a part of the team, as well as school board member Charlie Eastham, and it was just kind of nice to go through that process and get a greater understanding of, the budget and how it really does affect our community. So, yeah, thanks for all that you do and your team.
Welcome, thanks. And I agree, I think that meeting, which has only been going on for, last 8 years or so, is definitely a good opportunity for us to share what we do
Great.
with the committee, so.
Great. If there are no other comments, could I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by county, seconded by the City of Iowa City. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.
Man, that was exhausting.
We're trying to save ourselves for this evening.
You guys have fun.
Yes. Good to see all of you.
We'll catch you on TV. Well, wave at us at exactly 9 o'clock.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
okay.
See you.
See ya.
Yes.
That sounds very good.
We spent a lot of time on that. All right, we are transitioning over to the City of Iowa City Council work session for February 18, 2020. And our first item on the agenda is the discussion of the development proposal on 400 block of North Clinton Street, which is IP4. And hello.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Ann Russett with Neighborhood and Development Services. As the mayor mentioned, this is a discussion on the 400 block of North Clinton Street. Here's an overview of my presentation. This site actually has quite a bit of background, so I'm going to go over the history of the site and where we're at today and why we're discussing it now. I'm going to share some images of the existing development on these sites, as well as the proposed development. I'll cover the comments that we've received to date from some stakeholder groups in the community, including the Preservation Commission and Friends of Historic Preservation. I'm going to go over a summary of the existing conditions, kind of what's on the ground now, today, and what could be built under the current zoning, and then what has been proposed for the site. And then we have some questions for council, and what we're really looking forward from the council tonight is some direction moving forward on next steps. So this is an aerial of the site. It's 410, 412 North Clinton Street. It's identified in red. And then 400 North Clinton Street and 112 East Davenport Street. This is Courier Residence Hall to the west. In terms of background, this started back in 2018, where the City Council considered a local landmark designation for 410, 412 North Clinton Street. They then deferred the decision on that local landmark designation to January 2019, while staff explored a citywide transfer of development rights ordinance. And the purpose of the TDR program was to explore if there was interest in creating a citywide policy where property owners could locally landmark a historic property and then transfer some of the development potential from that historic site to an alternative site, a receiving site where the development was more appropriate. Staff spent several months working on that ordinance. The ordinance ultimately was not passed. So in January of 2019, Council reconsidered the local landmark designation, and although there was support for the designation, the vote required a supermajority, and it failed at Council. After the failed vote, staff reached out to the property owner of 410, 412 North Clinton Street to explore options for a voluntary local landmark designation. And the property owner was open to exploring a scenario where the city would grant extra development potential for 400 North Clinton Street and 112 East Davenport Street in exchange for the local landmark designation of 410, 412 North Clinton Street. We have received some concepts for that redevelopment, which I'll share. Last month, staff presented this redevelopment option to the Commission, Historic Preservation Commission, and received some comments. And then a few weeks ago, the property owner submitted a demolition application for 410, 412 North Clinton Street. So again, the proposal is to locally landmark 410, 412 in exchange for extra development potential for these two sites here, 400 North Clinton and 112 East Davenport. Here are some images of what's on the ground today. This is the historic property at 410, 412. This is the building at 400 North Clinton Street. And the building at 112 East Davenport Street. And here's a view from the southwest corner looking at 410 and 400 North Clinton Street. And then across the street to the west is Courier Residence Hall. Next, I'm going to share the plans which have been submitted by the property owner for the redevelopment of 400 North Clinton and 112 East Davenport. Here's 410, 412, the historic property. And then this is the proposed redevelopment right here. This is showing the underground parking, 21 parking spaces that would be provided underground. In total, it's a 6-story block-scale building with a total of 30 dwelling units. Access to the parking is provided via the alley to the north through the 410, 412 property. Here's an elevation, the Clinton Street elevation, and the Davenport Street elevation. So again, this is 671 bedrooms, 300 units, or 30 units, excuse me. So some of the comments that we received since staff has started exploring this with the property owner. We presented this to council several months ago, the previous city council, and there was an interest in exploring a 4-story structure that was similar to Courier Hall, and there was interest in having a high level of design review to ensure that the development would be compatible with the existing neighborhood. Staff also received comments from Friends of Historic Preservation. They were concerned about the demolition of 400 North Clinton Street, but they also felt that 410, 412 was too important not to try to save. However, they wanted us to consider some additional provisions, one of which was the rehab of 410 North Clinton Street in compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards for the exterior, ensuring a compatible adjacent use, a design review on the rehab work by the Historic Preservation Planner and the Historic Preservation Commission, a discussion of listing in the National Register and tax credits, and design review of the new building to maybe include the Preservation Commission, and then lastly, any salvage of any buildings that would be demolished. Staff presented this concept at the commission's meeting last month, and Friends of Historic Preservation were also at this meeting, and they reiterated the importance of 410, 412 North Clinton Street. They did recommend some design changes to the proposed building that was that I just showed to you. They recommended removing the sixth story, allowing the 5th story to be built without a step back, and replacing the gabled roof with a flat roof to help reduce the scale. We also discussed this with the Historic Preservation Commission. There was some concern that the properties, that historic properties are being held hostage, that the history of the community is being leveraged for private gain. And ideally that they'd also like to see 400 North Clinton Street saved, but they also, the main takeaway was that they thought it was important to work with the property owner to achieve an Iowa City landmark designation for 410, 412 North Clinton Street. They were interested in exploring the recommended changes to the design that Friends of Historic Preservation outlined. They also expressed a need similar to Friends of Historic Preservation for rehab on the historic structure. They recommended transparency in the process in terms of the public benefits that would be received, the bonus heights or the private gains that would be received by the property owner, and that there was a concern that certain features of the built environment, such as height, that those need to be carefully considered. There was also an interest in exploring a more comprehensive solution, something similar maybe to a transfer of development rights ordinance, instead of negotiating these on a case-by-case basis. One of the questions that was raised by the commission was what could be built on the sites right now, what's there currently, and so I'm going to share a few slides that outline what's there now and what could be redeveloped. This was not shared with the commission at the time, though. So let's start with 410, 412 North Clinton Street. In terms of existing conditions, it's zoned RM44, which is high-density multifamily. There are currently 18 dwelling units and 9 parking spaces. In terms of maximum redevelopment potential, the maximum number of units would be 24. That's a straightforward density calculation. It doesn't incorporate any of the other zoning regulations, setback, building coverage, open space, parking. The open space requirement for 24 units is 2,400 square feet and 24 parking spaces, and the maximum height would be 35 feet. Looking at 400 North Clinton Street and 112 East Davenport Street to the south, it's also zoned RM44. There are 11 units there currently and 7 parking spaces. If it was redeveloped under the existing zoning RM44, they could get a maximum of 24 units. Again, that's not incorporating other zoning regulations. There would be a minimum open space requirement of 2,400 square feet, 24 parking spaces, and the maximum height would be 35 feet. If this site was rezoned to PRM, they could get a few more units, up to 27, but they would also need more open space and more parking. The PRM zone does have bonus provisions that allow increases in height, reduced setbacks. So the PRM zone with the current bonus provisions allows up to 65 feet with those bonuses. This slide summarizes what the property owner has proposed. So it would be a rezoning to PRM. The number of units proposed is 30. That's 71 bedrooms. There's currently no open space shown on the plan. There are 21 parking spaces. It's a 6-story structure. And based on these plans, they show that the following zoning regulations would need to be waived or modified. So it'd be reduced setbacks, increased height, increased density, increased building coverage, reduced parking, and reduced open space. So this would require a text amendment to our zoning code to allow more than what the current PRM zoning provisions allow. And this table is just kind of a summary of the existing conditions versus potential redevelopment, just all in one slide. So with that, we have several questions for the City Council tonight, which are up on the screen right now. I'll just walk through those. We want to know if the City Council wants staff to continue coordinating with the property owner on the design of the building and draft the necessary code changes. We're interested to know if there are certain code changes that the City Council would not support. For example, reduced parking, increased density, reduced open space. We're interested to know what type of design process the City Council envisions. If this property is rezoned to PRM, that would allow a multifamily building to be built there through a staff-level administrative review. So if there's more process that the council envisions, we'd kind of like to know what that would look like. There would be obviously a rezoning process, so that would be a discretionary review that would come to the City Council as well. And then if there are any other factors that City Council would like staff to consider. Just to give some examples, there have been several items that have come up through this discussion. One, the rehab of 410, 412 North Clinton Street, salvage of building materials, that type of thing. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Ann? So we have questions before us that staff want. So maybe we'll start with number 1. And that is, does the staff want staff to continue coordinating with the property owners on this design of the building and draft the necessary code changes. And we might, I don't know if people have comments just on, in general, about the project itself that you want to throw out there first.
Yeah, to me, there's some other issues that need to be answered before that first question can be answered, and in terms of what
Sure.
kind of code changes that we could agree to or not agree to for 400 North Clinton and 112, is it Davenport? When I look at that, the proposed building there, to me, it doesn't fit at all in that neighborhood. You know, most of those are 2.5 story, I think, buildings around there, more house-style dimension buildings. When we had talked about it before, we had talked about, you know, if we were going to support something like that, then certainly nothing taller than Burge. This is significantly taller than that, and just the whole block-long building, to me, doesn't fit. And so I feel like we're in a real quandary in terms of where do people put more priority, and that is in preserving 410, 412 versus this. I mean, because to preserve that at this point with what's being proposed, what's being asked is something I wouldn't support. So I mean, I'll just leave it at that for this point.
I think in response to that, Susan, I think it was described pretty clearly as those properties being held hostage for the approval of this property. And when I first saw the pictures, I was excited, having lived in Courier many, many years ago. I thought, oh, that looks just like Courier. And then I realized, no, that this is much taller, the 6 stories. And I think we'd made it clear, one of the points was that we'd made it clear that perhaps 4 stories at the max. I do feel it's important to preserve 410, 412, and I would wish and hope that the developer and property owner would act in good faith and work with us on that.
If I could just comment on that, I think I want to stress to you that staff initiated this discussion, so the council had a chance to designate it, and it was a very high threshold to do so. A supermajority is very hard, but I personally don't think it's fair to characterize this particular example as holding a property hostage. The owner doesn't even own or control this property. This would involve the owner buying this property in order to preserve that. So from my standpoint, we as a city had a chance to preserve that. We decided not to for good reason. And I think that the developer has invested time and money in developing a concept that would work for them. They have to look at the economics of it, and I think that's what has led to this point. So I just want to be cautious about looking at it like it's being held hostage. There's a solution out there. It may not be a great solution. It may not be a solution worth pursuing, but I do appreciate the fact that the owner was willing to work with us to this point.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the effort everyone has put into this to try to come to a resolution which would be satisfactory to all the concerns. And so, in a way, one of my concerns with respect to that is, and it was referenced in the staff presentation, the question of transparency in the process, because I'd like to have, insofar as I view this as a negotiation that's being driven by, in a sense, a transfer of development rights on a kind of case basis, how do we go through that negotiation? What is, staff did, and this is the first time I'd seen kind of a matrix indicating, what could happen under current zoning, what could happen under PRM, and so forth. To try to, in good faith, negotiate alternatives for the design based on how we would, the city through staff and the developer find a mutually satisfactory solution with respect to how both sides can feel whole at the end of that process. And I'm not clear how the proposal as developed it reflects that, because, you know, we don't know what the, I don't know what staff's response is in terms of how we would estimate the value of that development to be. I think it would be important to have an understanding, kind of like we would with a TIF process, in a sense. You know, try to monetize what it is that's being negotiated, so we have a better idea of what the options are, and how they benefit all the parties. So that's something I kind of see as missing. You know, how do we on the city side with staff understand that kind of cost analysis that I would think we could easily translate from various proposals as to what, you know, what the value of what the land is now monetarily and what the value would be with different options. I'm personally willing to, in terms of some of these questions, explore the parking requirement, you know, and this is a transit corridor in my view. It is something where I think it would be worth considering whether we could waive the parking requirement and let that be determined by the developer, given that there is considerable transit running through this corridor. And we're looking, you know, I tend to want to be looking forward in terms of issues related to transportation, because I do tend to think the way we've viewed the world is changing, and that how that would be reflected in our parking requirement, especially in a location where it seems we might be able to accept a lower level of parking, off-street parking, to put that on the table.
This was a project that I was really interested in preserving historically, and we didn't get the supermajority vote. And so I'm happy to actually see this back before council, just for the possibility of it potentially being preserved. When I think about the area, and I know that some councilors have already talked about like the area, it really is an area that when we're looking at high density and the proposed project, I don't think it's appropriate. And so that's where my interest in trying to figure out how can we reserve, you know, 410, 412 to be historic. One of the questions that I do have, I know that the Historic Preservation did do a presentation or, you know, submitted some stuff. Has the developers actually responded in any fashion to any of their requests?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Because sometimes I think that could be the, you know, maybe we'll make some comments and hopefully staff can navigate with the developers, kind of what we're thinking. And for me, this isn't the end of the conversation. I would hope that the developer would be willing to come back and talk to us about this, that this is just the start of the dialogue, just to get what counselors are thinking, and then maybe, you know, go back, think about it, and then come back with, you know, ways of how they see that they can move forward, you know, with this project, with some of the things in mind. Of course, you know, I would be not realistic if I was to believe that everything that we said they would, you know, actually do. But I think it's an opportunity to have a great conversation. And, you know, it did lack supermajority, but there are some positives for this particular project that I think the council is interested in. For me, again, I think some of the historic preservation comments, I really agree with at least two of them that I wanted to at least point out. That is, you know, maybe going down to 5 stories. And the other is, you know, that setback. And so those are the two. And when it comes down to the parking, I think when we're talking about climate action and that type stuff, this might be a project where I would be willing to decrease the parking requirements. We have our transit study, which is actually on our agenda to get an update about today. Climate action, you know, that's something that is, you know, the council is really dedicated to. So for me, those are probably the 3 things that I just wanted to make mention here today.
I also agree with most of what my fellow council said. To me, it's really this big change from the current existing design and building there to suddenly 6-story building. This is concern for me, and I think so. I want to see 4 to 5, maybe. But it is a very good idea to just go back to the property owner and sit down and talk with him if they can agree to do this. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also be interested in the context of when the council previously was talking about the transfer of development rights, that the conversation was okay, maybe something up to 4 that would match Courier. That was in the context of still preserving and transferring rights, right, at that time?
Not as part of the citywide ordinance, but after.
But for this specific
Yes,
project?
yes,
Okay,
yeah.
so is there any insight as to how we got from that sort of guidance that the council provided at that time to the 6-story kind of full block proposal?
Well, we provided those comments to the property owner, and they proposed the 6-story building, which is before you.
So we've had a couple of back and forths as staff with the property owner to try to bring it more in line with the council direction from that work session that's being talked about now. At the end of the day, I think the message that we've gotten back is in order for the economics to work, they need X number of units, and right now that puts them at 6 stories. So I think what we're trying to gauge here is 6 is there a hard no on 6, then that's good to know. We'll go back and say, if there's any way to make 5 work, 4 to 5, whatever you feel is appropriate, then we'll give it a go. The council just needs to understand if that's a hard line at 6, it may not go forward. And that, of course, could put both properties in jeopardy in terms of demolishing the existing structures.
Are they willing to give any transparency as to that economic analysis?
Representative is here.
We certainly haven't required them to submit any economic analysis. I don't know if they'd be willing to do that or not. We can look at the matrix that you put up. Maybe if you could put the summary matrix up, and I think you can get a decent sense for the potential for units. So, if you just look across the yellow column there is what they're proposing, which would be 30 units. And with the redevelopment, you're going to get a max of 48. Realistically, it'll be some number smaller than that because of all the other regulations. But I don't think what they're asking for far exceeds, certainly if it exceeds at all, what the potential would be if both those properties were raised and developed under the current zoning code. Is that accurate, Ann?
So if all of the properties are raised.
410, 412, 400, and 112 are all raised. They're likely, maybe that's not a fair statement. It's probable that they could get more than 30 units.
With all of those sites combined,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So, but again, to circle back to your direct question, no, we haven't requested any type of economic analysis.
And if I could just add regarding the 6 stories versus the 5, the plans show that those upper units are 2-story units. So I'm not sure if it would be a great reduction in the number of units if the 6-story was removed. So that's something that we could ask the developer about.
I did a little bit of looking at, I was looking at some of the background information on this, and there was some discussion of form-based coding. We don't have it for this particular area. I did look at some other draft form-based codes in other cities, and they have code requirements for any building proposed adjacent to an historic resource. So there are kind of ways in which we could access some of that information just by, kind of looking at other codes where such a requirement is identified. But this project has this issue again of height and mass. I mean, this is a very, it's a 6-story building, but it's also a kind of a massive building, and with limited amount of articulation to break up that mass. And that's part of what I think you would find with these form-based codes, is that they would identify ways in which the massing of the building could be articulated in a way where it wouldn't quite seem like such a block. It's kind of a block form and a block shape, and how do we break down that massing so it doesn't seem quite so large? That might have an impact, in addition to changing the roof design, to reducing the impact of 6 stories. Another thing I might be thinking about is this building is to the south of our historic resource, so the height of it will have an impact in terms of sunlight reaching the structure. So if there were a way of, and again, this is kind of part of a massing study, to mass it in such a way that that's acknowledged, so that the impacts on sun axis would be considered in the massing of the project.
I guess,
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
I just have a question on this diagram. This is a little bit confusing to me. When you say redevelopment rezoning to PRM, and under height, you say 35 feet up to 65 with bonuses. How many stories is that? And you say 60-story, that's what they propose. And here you just don't tell us the story, and it's just height. Is that the same, 60-story also?
Yeah, you could probably get a 6-story building with 65
65.
feet, yeah.
Okay. And the 35 is?
That's the base. That's the base
3 to
maximum.
4, or the
3, yes, 3
3.
stories, yeah.
Okay.
Do we have an actual dimension on the 6 stories too?
I don't know the height in feet, just in stories, yeah.
Because that matters too. I mean, I think ultimately what we're talking about is the actual height of the building, not the floors, in my view.
And also for the bedrooms number, I really want to compare if we redevelopment to rezoning to PRM, how many bedroom will be there? And the ask is 30 unit, 71 bedroom. But what about the PRM? How many bedroom will be?
So the PRM zone without any bonus provisions would be 27 units maximum. So even with the bonus provisions in the PRM zone, you couldn't get what they have proposed. So that's why we would need the additional text amendments to the code that would allow them to go above and beyond what the current bonus provisions allow.
Yeah, but is the difference really big difference? Because I want to compare it if it's really huge different or just.
Let me see here. I thought I had a summary. So they'd be asking for more units, so 3 more units, so it'd be an increase in density. They'd be asking for a reduction in open space. Currently, there isn't that type of bonus provision offered, so that would be new. They're asking for a parking reduction, which is also new, something that isn't currently allowed by the code. They're asking for reduced setbacks beyond what the current bonus provisions allow, and increased, kind of along with that, increased building coverage.
I see. Okay.
So the exact numbers I don't have, but generally that's what they
Yes.
would be required based on what has currently been proposed.
Okay, get you.
I think for the benefit of the new council and maybe even for the public's sake, can you just talk about what it entails to rezone from the 44 to the PRM?
Yeah, that would have to go to the City Planning and Zoning Commission for review and recommendation to City Council. So it would be an amendment to our map, our zoning map, and then a text of the code as well. So it would be 2 separate rezonings that would go together through that same process, through Planning Commission into City Council.
Really basic question about the textual amendment to the zoning code. Is it specific to just that property? So it wouldn't be applied throughout the PRM zone?
We haven't really gotten into the details of what the amendment would look like, but it would be, we would want to keep it narrow, so it would be associated with the preservation of a historic structure, is the thought at this point.
But in theory, then that maybe could be applied to other similar scenarios where you had someone wanting to do something like this?
I guess if that's something the council doesn't want us to explore, we could get it as narrow as possible.
And that's also one of the reasons why we like the PRM zone better than the current zone, is because the PRM is kind of there's not a whole lot of PRM left. It's a zoning classification that's largely been phased out of the community, whereas the RM44 is still widely used throughout the city. So I think we could narrow it enough to where, in all likelihood, it would just apply to this property.
Mm-hmm.
And PRM is planned residential multifamily, is that?
Yeah, that's correct.
And can you tell me, I just got 2 or 3 questions here. By right, the property owner could raise all 4 of these properties, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so with the grid that you had up there, keeping them separate, they could redevelop 410, 412 with a maximum of 24 units, and they could redevelop 400 North Clinton and 112 East Davenport with 24 units, correct?
That's right, not considering the other zoning regulations such as parking and open space.
So those could very well be reduced
Yes.
once you start getting into the nitty-gritty of those issues. Okay. What about, would there be any restrictions in terms of how large that building is? In other words, could somebody combine these, say, 4 parcels and put one huge building on there, accommodating the parking and open space requirements?
Yeah, they could. It could be a block scale building that's 35 feet high maximum. It would be subject to our multifamily site development standards, but it could be one building.
Was there any discussion of demolishing the apartment building behind the historic building as part of a scenario, or was that not considered?
We discussed that with the property owner very early on, and there wasn't an interest to do that.
Well, just so we don't lose sight of it, I am interested in the rehabilitation and salvage recommendations from, I think was that the Friends of Historic Preservation that brought that up? I don't know how other people feel about those details.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I thought there were a number of good recommendations without going through them. I don't know that any of them I would say I disagreed with. I think they're all worth considering personally.
So I know that, again, you had some questions for council, and
Well, I think maybe the first one that could end it all is, are you comfortable with the mass and scale as presented now? And if the answer is no, do you think you could get comfortable with a 5-story or a 4, at what point do you think you become comfortable? Is it 3, 4, 5? Because I think the rest will kind of fall into place once we get a sense of your willingness to accept scale.
And I guess I did state, the 3 things, and that was one, going to the 5 stories.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with 6.
I'm not either.
I'm not comfortable as it's presented. Again, I don't know that, it may be possible with a very different approach in terms of building articulation, the use potentially of open space to help with that articulation. But as presented, I think it clearly would require a reworking.
I guess also where I come down is, and this, involves negotiation, obviously, is I would hate to see us make a decision that, okay, here's our line, and the developer says, okay, forget it, I can't work with that. And then we end up with all 4 of these properties raised and end up with a 35-foot-high block scale building, because I think then you're probably almost as bad off as anything else that could be. So I guess I say that to say, without a whole lot of guidance, see what else you can negotiate.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah, what you just described is really the worst scenario, and as much as I think those of us who would like to preserve the building have concerns about what goes up next to it, the thought of that is even more problematic. So I have been concerned, and this is sort of on a citywide basis, with the loss of our lot size type development. And the more we end up consolidating and seeing block form buildings, that's a transformational change. So I do want to try, aside from preserving this building, the scale of smaller buildings, I think, is an important strategy we should be exploring. And that can be accomplished in a larger project.
From my perspective, I really feel like I will hope that the staff can convey that this is just the start of the conversations. Hopefully, with whatever we've talked about today, the developers clearly hear, the many voices of council, and that they can find a way to maybe a path to give us somewhat what we want for the community, and so hopeful that you all will be able to navigate. Yeah.
Did we give enough direction, or did we have enough conversation among ourselves about these specific things like density, parking, and reduced open space? Should we articulate that a little better?
yeah, I don't have a problem with reduced parking, particularly given the proximity to the university. With the right design, I don't have a problem with increased density. I'd be concerned about how much open space reduction we would give, because I think it is important for people to have some space outside, so it's a bit iffy for me on that one.
That's pretty much where I would be as well. I'd be okay reducing parking. My concern, I would correlate my concern with the height and the scale of this building with the lack of open space, right? It looks like they're just really trying to maximize no setbacks, no open space, less parking. And that seems too extreme to me. So, I'd be willing, like the height consideration has to relate, I think, to that open space, like the concept of a taller building, as John was saying, maybe done in a way that isn't so extreme.
I would agree with Susan and Laura. In some ways, when I step back from this, I look and say, well, the previous council made a decision, and now we're in this somewhat awkward position looking at those 2 buildings because the previous council couldn't muster a supermajority for whatever reason because of property rights. So we need to look at that and think about that as well. And I agree with what the Historic Preservation Commission stated, which is I think that going forward we should consider perhaps a more holistic approach to this sort of issue, because this is not the first time it's come up. It won't be the last time it comes up.
I do wonder if we have a little more discussion on increased density, because now they could go in, the square footage becomes really small in order to increase the number of occupants. So I don't know if people have any comments about that. On one level, I hear students saying, give me a closet, and, and I'll sleep in it, as long as the rents are, low. So I think, at least from my perspective, just to have some type of intentionality about the conversation when it comes down to increased density, of course. I don't know if they know what their market rate will be or the rates they'll have for the properties, but I think that is something that I at least wanted to mention, that it is important, the density. I do foresee this always being a student, run and lived in property, and so it's just that density just need to have a little intentional conversation surrounding that.
Density is kind of it's a complicated, and it's not even clear to me what's the intent there when we say increased density. What does that mean? Did you have something?
I mean, I guess the way I would look at it is staff is asking us, are we willing to look at density higher than what the current code is? And to me, I'm not willing to go.
How are we measuring density?
Dwelling units per acre.
Units per
Not
acre,
the size, not the
because
actual size.
another way of measuring density would be occupancy levels. I mean, there are a number of
Units.
three-bedroom units in this proposal, which means fewer units, but a fairly large number of occupants. So are we talking occupant density or unit density? It's just a little unclear to me.
It's dwelling units per acre.
Right.
And
Under the PRM and RM 44?
yeah, and it does change, the size of the unit changes. The density calculation changes based on whether it's a one-bedroom, two-bedroom, or three-bedroom unit. So the one-bedroom allows the highest density versus a three-bedroom, which would be a lower density.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Anything else for staff? All right, thank you. All right. Any other comments on this from counselors? No. All right, we are going to move on to transit study. We're excited to hear about this.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, councilors. Darian Nagel-Gam, Transportation Services Department. I'm here to provide you with a brief update on the transit study. If you can believe it, we're about halfway through the planning process, so I'm excited to share some updates with you about where we're at and where we're going from here.
Great.
First and foremost, just to revisit who's all involved in the transit study. So of course, Iowa City is the lead agency, but we have partnered with CANBUS, with the University of Iowa, and with the city of Coralville. We've also reached out to many different stakeholder groups in the community, and that's advocacy groups, economic development organizations, schools, civic organizations, various committees. Sustainability groups. Has really been a lot of folks that we've reached out to in the community who have helped us along in this process. Nelson Nygaard is our consultant team that's been helping guide us through this process. They've got experience across the United States in helping communities just like ours walk through their transit studies and a revision of their transit system. And last but not least, the public has been a very important participant in the study, and we'll walk through a little bit more about what our public outreach has looked like. Also, I'd like to just revisit some of the goals with the transit study to bring these to the forefront of your mind. And of course, first and foremost, we're really looking at ways that we can increase ridership. So that means making transit more dependable for those who rely on it every day, and our goal is to make transit an easier choice for those that have more mobility options. And we've even laid down a very explicit goal and a high-reaching goal, but of doubling our ridership over the next 10 years. So it's pretty lofty, but we think with the correct service design and some new initiatives, we can get there. We also have a goal of working better across our agencies. Of course, we're really a 3-agency system, transit system in the metro area, and we're increasingly connected, and we have people traveling across our metro area every single day. So we're really trying to create a more streamlined experience for our customers and make it easier and make things more similar across our agencies. I would say one of our biggest goals, besides increasing ridership, the question of how do you get to that increased ridership is really removing barriers to transit use. So that's anything from improving our service levels to actually making it a service that meets people's needs or better meets people's needs, to improving our trip planning capabilities, improving the information distribution, making transit easier for people to understand, easier to access, getting that data out there so that people don't have to memorize the system. They can, dial it up on their phone. It can be very easy for people to choose transit. We also want to make our transit stops more comfortable, and that could be anything from amenities like benches or trash cans or some shelter. Some of our new bus shelters have solar lighting at night. That's been really well received through the community. So just how can we improve those things so people are comfortable when they're at transit stops? And I would say the last barrier that we're really looking to tackle is simplifying the system. Again, some people look at transit and it seems so complicated to them. So how can we structurally make our transit system easier for people to use, easier for people to understand? Of course, another goal ties right in with our climate action initiatives and our climate action plan, and that's just reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We all know that transportation is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in this community. And the Climate Action Plan calls for us to enable a shift of 55% of vehicle trips to more sustainable modes, biking, walking, transit comes to mind, to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals by the year 2050. And we don't want to forget supporting the local economy. I mean, the transit system connects people to jobs, people to shopping trips, people to social activities every single day. That keeps our local economy running strong. So we want to make sure that we are building a system for the future that helps support that and grow that aspect. And then last but not least, leveraging emerging technology. This is where things get kind of exciting because, we're in, as Councilor Thomas mentioned earlier, we're in a pretty exciting time in terms of transportation, and things are going to look very different in the next few years. We're in a time of transition, and so it's a good point to stop and evaluate what sort of emerging technologies are out there right now that we can leverage today to help make public transportation and mobility better for our community. So those are our goals. I'm just going to quickly transition to what is included in ICATS. That's the Iowa City Area Transit Study. You might see that acronym a few times. Just to briefly sort of run down the process here, but first and foremost, public outreach has occurred throughout the process, and I'll get a little bit more into detail on that on the next slide. But we've also conducted a market analysis to understand where our transit riders are, where our potential transit riders are across the community. We have analyzed our existing service levels, and we've also developed some future service options and scenarios. Our consultant team has taken a lot of that feedback we've heard from the community, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those service scenarios might look like. And really right now where we're at in the process is we are evaluating some future service options and scenarios. So we're asking the community to do some tough work and to really evaluate the system and some actual alternatives and let us know what they think. And from that, we'll be developing recommendations for what the transit system of the future might look like. So public outreach, phase one. So I'm going to rewind, take us all back in time to last fall, just to give you an update of how we got to where we're at today. So basically from September to December, we held approximately 20 some stakeholder outreach meetings. We had 3 very well-attended public open house meetings. We were able to sit down with 1,000 Iowa City Transit riders while they were on the bus and talk to them about how they use transit today, where are they going, what are the gaps they see in service, or what service improvements would they like to see. We were able to get 1,300 members of the public to submit a design your own transit system survey, which was really great. It helped us understand what the community's priorities are for transit system enhancements relative to each other. Of course, we all know, I think any one of us could design the ultimate transit system with unlimited funds and blank checks, but we live in a world where we have limited access to financial resources, so we really need to prioritize, and the community really helped us walk through that with the 1,300 submissions. We were thrilled to see that kind of participation. And then last but not least, operator and staff interviews. So we sat down with our transit staff and said, what do you think? I mean, these are the people that are on the road every day that talk to customers every single day. What do you see as some things that we really need to take a hard look at in terms of our transit system? And on top of those meetings and those public outreach events, we did a lot of communications and marketing. We put together a study website, an email list, did many group presentations just like this to anybody who would listen to me talk about transit. We reached out to some social service agencies and advocacy partners and had them we had actually a partnership with the mobility coordinator at Johnson County and the Community Transportation Committee, who actually took iPads out into the community to our underserved folks who are probably the hardest people to reach in terms of getting that feedback about transit use. And they were able to bring back 125 surveys out of those design your own system surveys, which was about 10% of those. So we were really thrilled about that. We also had an extensive social media campaign. You probably saw us on Facebook, Twitter, and also city media campaign. The communications crew did an excellent job. There's many videos that were out there that highlighted our transit system in our study and really helped get the word out. And of course, we had legacy press, print and typical historical news, television news and print to get that word out. And really the goal for all of that outreach last fall was really to just understand the community's mobility priorities currently and where they wanted to go. So what you see up here on the computer is just an overview of, and I know it's sort of hard to read, so I'll read some of the top ones to you, but this really summarizes the feedback we got from the Design Your Own Transit System survey. And this is really kind of the one graph that really shows you, that highlights what the community's desires are, sort of stacked ranked from that first big public outreach push. And I think the best way to summarize it would be better weekend service was really a most desired improvement. You could see Sunday service was at the top of the list, but also earlier and later Saturday service. Route and schedule information at stops, that one ranked very high. The public wants to see more information so they can walk up to a stop and have some information there about when the buses are going to be coming. Another one that I was a little bit surprised at, but also not surprised, I suppose, more lighting at major stops. Judging by how well received the lighting in our new transit shelters has been received by the communities, that one, it's a clear indicator that we need to be doing more of that. Frequent weekday rush hour service. We did hear both in the onboard survey and through the Design Your Own System survey that frequent service is at the top of people's list. More frequent service, so you think less about when the next bus is coming. You just get to a stop and a bus is going to be there before too long. So that was at the top of both surveys. Of course, later weekday service, we did hear from the community that they want to be able to take buses more places in the evenings. And then direct service from outlying residential areas also was ranking high. More frequent Saturday service, more benches, shelters. It's, again, those transit amenities. And I won't read them all to you, but just to give you a sense of what's sort of at the top of the public's mind from that first big public outreach push. So that brings us to today. So right now we're in our public outreach phase 2, and that's really from January up until March. And really what we're asking the public to do now is to review 3 alternate service scenarios and then 1 sort of vision scenario. And I'll take you through them on the next slide briefly. But in terms of the outreach, we've presented those scenarios online. We had 3 very well attended public open house meetings. You can tell that the public really cares. There was lines 3, 5, 6 people deep from every transit staffer and every consultant that was in the room and every city staffer who was in the room to ask questions, give feedback. So we were really thrilled to have that kind of engagement. We've also published all those meeting materials online for anyone to review who wasn't able to attend. We have a formal survey online as well where the public can. It's a lot to digest, and I'll show you the maps on the next slide, but it's a lot for the public to digest even in one meeting. A lot of folks asked some questions, pointed out some things, but they really needed to take those maps home and just study them, which we understand. So we provided an online survey that's linked to our website where the community can take some time, review, respond to both the scenarios or just individual route changes that they had comments on. We've also had, for the second outreach push, we've had an extensive social and city media campaign. Again, the communications team has done a really great job helping us get that word out. And we're, again, working with our community partners, as we did in the first round, to help make sure those who maybe aren't going to be the ones who come and attend the meetings or don't have easy access to, a mobile device to take the survey on, that we're getting those folks to the survey to help them take it. So in terms of those three scenarios that we have, we're asking the public now for feedback on, they were developed based on the feedback that we heard from the community during our first public outreach push and based on expertise of our transit consultant staff. And they basically, each scenario has a different theme. The first scenario's theme, and I know this is a very small font, but the first one is frequency. So really the goal of that was to increase the frequency on the routes to a point where 15-minute service is what you could provide on some of our most important arterial streets in terms of transit service. Before I go any further, I should mention too, all of these three scenarios were developed using our current funding available. So basically what our consultant team did is they took our current budget, they took all that feedback that we got from the community and all of their knowledge and expertise from doing this across the country, and they developed these three scenarios based on the financial resources we have available to us today. So it's sort of reimagining our transit system, and this would be no additional dollars. This is what we could do today. So again, frequency, the theme of the frequency service was really to provide more frequent service. And a couple things you'll see between all the themes, it's kind of a theme that carries between the themes, if you will, is that the actual service was focused on arterials at our major streets to help get that frequency, which the community was asking for. You'll also notice that in some areas where we probably had maybe what you could consider overlapping routes or areas that were served by multiple routes, you could have seen those combined to create a more efficient transit system. And in some areas where service was very low in ridership, that service has been reallocated to other areas. So those are ways in which they took our existing finances and then they sort of resorted them out based on the community priorities as they heard. Second scenario is, I think the theme of that would be simplified coverage, and that's, again, trying to, there's not as much frequency as in the frequency scenario, but it's also trying to make the routes easier, simpler and more efficient, but also easier for the community to understand. And then the theme of the third scenario was restructuring and improving weekends and evening service. So we did hear loud and clear that additional weekend service and evening service, later service during the evenings was towards the top of people's lists. So this gets at that particular, this is a way to get at increasing that service level at night and on the weekends. In addition, this is the only scenario in which there is a Sunday service component to it. The Sunday service component that was built into this, with using our existing finances, is a demand response service where the city is more or less split into 4 quadrants. And to briefly give you a service overview, you would call for the service up to an hour before. You'd need a little time, and there would be one vehicle running in each quadrant of the city, and they would all meet back at the downtown interchange once an hour. So that's how transfers would happen. So this was the only scenario in which, under our current resources, we were able to fit a type of Sunday service into it. And we'll talk more about some of those other options. But this is, again, these are the 3 scenarios that we took to the public, and they've been providing us feedback on what their thoughts are. So we also, and I've mentioned this a few times as well, but we also asked the consultant team to help us walk through what we could do to enhance our services if we had additional financial resources allocated towards our system, and they came up with all of these options on the screen. The first one that you all know that we've been evaluating is zero fare transit. The second one is they came up with a scenario where they placed 15-minute service on 11 different corridors, which would be pretty remarkable level of service. You really wouldn't have to think a lot about transit service. You just have to be able to get to your nearest arterial street. So it'd be 15-minute service during the day and a 30-minute service during the evening. That would be very high level, high quality frequency of service. Another option would be providing full fixed route service on Sundays from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. and every 30 minutes. Taking that service so it operates to midnight daily, that would require additional resources, but again, that was something that we heard from the community. Another option would be to provide some sort of an on-demand night owl service from 11 a.m. to 6 a.m. And this is for the folks in the community that we heard from who have third shift jobs. They don't necessarily have easy, transit system closes down at night, and this would be an alternative for those folks. Another enhanced service option is to provide some on-demand service in areas that are not within a quarter mile of fixed routes. So one aspect of those three scenarios, if you look at the maps a little closer, you will notice that it does, in order to provide the frequency of service, the coverage areas somewhat retracts from our current coverage areas. So this is a way to help support those who live at a greater distance from the proposed transit system designs. Another service is a 30-minute Saturday service from 7 a.m. until midnight. So that's every half an hour. That would increase our service levels to what we have today. And then it would go later in the evenings. And then last but not least, a new crosstown route that connects key destinations in South and West Iowa City without requiring a transfer downtown. So those are the things we heard from the community, and the consultant team has preliminarily begun to evaluate some potential options for add-on services. The startup capital costs for all of these combined is estimated conservatively and preliminarily to be at $12 million at this point, and that's capital costs. So that's what we would need, the buses that we would need to get this full program rolling. And in addition, all of those vision items would require about $18 million in ongoing operational costs. That would be annual operational costs. And to put that in perspective, our operational costs are between $7 and $8 million per year currently. So it's double, slightly over double. In terms of what our operation costs are currently today, to give you sort of a framework. All of this will be we'll be providing more details as we move through the transit study on the individual costs and the ridership benefits for each one of these, so that we can sit down and you can put some deliberation to each one of these and determine if any of these are options that we want to pursue for the community. Really quickly, I'll zip through this, but other items, we aren't just evaluating the transit system design, although that's the biggest part of it, and that's what's been occupying most of our time for the last few months, but we're also, again, we're doing a fare analysis, including zero fare. We are, of course, developing strategies to improve our interagency coordination. How can we work better with Coralville and CAMBUS in order to provide service in our community? We are asking the consultants to help us develop an electric vehicle or alternate fuel vehicle. There's multiple options out there currently. A no or low emission vehicle transition plan, so we're very excited about that. We're also looking at interchange improvements. That's one thing we're hearing from the community, is that we need more amenities, and our interchange it's a great location, but there's also some drawbacks to that location. So they're helping us look at pedestrian access, operational flow, bus capacity, and that location in general. Is that the ideal location for us? We're also looking at bus stop improvements. And both evaluation of what amenities are out there and what exists at current bus stops, and also bus stop spacing guidelines. There's a balance between access and providing efficient transit, and so they're helping us to figure out where that should be. We're also looking at just some general policies and procedures, especially as they connect to our other community partners. And then, of course, we're really curious about the innovative transit solutions that are out there today, and what we can do, how we can leverage those and provide better transit. So last slide, next steps. So phase 2 of public input, which is what we're in right now, wraps in late February. So basically at the end of the week. So far, we've had 800 people weigh in to our survey online and give us some detailed feedback. So we're really looking forward to starting to dig into that. From that point, once we get through all of the feedback that we've received and that we've got from the public meetings and from our surveys online, we'll be working with the consultant team to develop a preferred scenario with the final recommendations coming this summer, and we expect to bring a plan to you this summer for your consideration. I would say the earliest that the community could see any changes would be fall of 2020, but that seems like a really lofty goal. Speaking of lofty goals, that might be a stretch. There's a lot that would have to go into even implementing some of these pieces, and it might be more realistic to think 2021, but we're not counting it out yet. So we're still optimistic. And then, of course, depending on what those priorities are that we identify, implementation could ultimately be phased. So it's really going to depend on what we determine at the end of the day is the right way forward and what we can do and how funding aligns with all of those things. So thank you for being so patient. I appreciate it. Let me know if there's any questions I can answer for you.
I really, I'm very glad that you're adding this step. This is really moving forward, and very happy to see this, moving. My question is, just remind me, how many languages you use for the survey?
So for the survey, so the onboard survey, we had a printout that we handed out that was in English and Spanish. For the online surveys, they're Google Translate translatable. So it was, you could provide feedback, you could review using the Google Translate option in any of 100 languages, is my understanding.
But why you don't have Arabic language, and you know that you have a big community who speak Arabic in this community. And all of them, most of them, I can say 99%, they use the pass to go to Kirkwood Community College and do this. And by the way, how many pages is the survey?
The survey this round of the survey is long. The pages is long because we offer an opportunity.
The first one. The
first one, oh goodness, I don't remember it. Maybe 10 pages because it's printing off a web form, so there's a lot of space in between them. But the actual content, I would say, is probably a couple pages long, 2, 3, sort of a multiple
Because
choice.
this is really not a lot of money to translate those kind of document. We translate, 1 hour of translation cost $25. And I don't know why the city is not doing that if we want to include everyone. I asked you before, I guess long time ago, I said we should include when we have the meeting at the county, and I said we should include some kind of language, Arabic language, Spanish language, and I said if you need people who can translate, we have. And I guess this, kind of study have a lot of budget into it, and I think that you can include the survey. Now we are missing really people who don't speak English, and they ride the bus. And this is not fair. And somebody else told me that when they went to this kind of meeting, those people wasn't there because they don't know, and you are not providing translation. We talked about this a lot. I don't know why the city is not moving forward on that. But this is something that you need to keep in mind on it. And right now, those 3 scenarios, it is very important for those people to choose one of them. I don't know, you are really far away on the process. I don't know how you can include those people right now. But my recommendation is to reach out to those people.
Absolutely. We did have, if I may respond, we did have instructions for using Google Translate for our first round of public outreach on the website. So we did put some posters up for this round of public input for our transit study. We did have flyers on the buses in Arabic, Chinese, Spanish, French, and there was one more that's escaping me right now. So yes, while it proved to be very difficult to translate in a time sense to individually translate each one of those documents that were online for our surveys, but we were hoping to rely on the use of Google Translate, which sort of does it automatically.
That doesn't make sense for Arabic. Because Arabic is from left to right, it can make sense for Spanish, it can make sense for that as a language. But for Arabic, because Arabic is like from right to the left, it really mixes up the word and you cannot do it. And I guess city needs to spend money for that. There is people here professional on translating document. If you don't know them, I can show it to you. You know, I can give you the contact information. We at the Center for Worker Justice, we do that. We pay them money so they can translate document for us. And I think the city better do that if that organization can do it. Those people are taxpayers. They need to be included. And I guess if they are paying taxes, we can spend a little bit money so we can reach out to them.
I don't know, I wanted to at least make some comments on the study. This is very lofty, to say the least. Very, a lot of the things that you've mentioned were some of the things that I didn't even think was a part of the study, so I do appreciate that. I was happy to hear about the 11 corridors with 15-minute service during the day and 30 at night. Just in theory, initially, that makes a lot of sense to me. One of the things that I'm hoping, and I think Maz do bring up an important, concern is along the way, she mentioned, individuals that were potentially excluded because of language. One of the things that I kind of zone in on is just what is something in this study that I really want to make sure is kind of like central to staff knowledge and to even our consultants' knowledge. And so that's something that I do think that the council really should be considering. If there is a hot topic item that you really want to see a part of this transit study, or you really want, maybe there's something that hasn't been mentioned that you want to talk about, that you kind of make sure that it's in the mix and on the staff is aware so that our consultants could at least navigate that on some level. Now, of course, individual counselors, there's something to be said about that, except I do believe that we don't want to come to when the study is being presented this summer, and then there's a whole new thought process that kind of either the full council get on board with, or we're having individuals kind of, present a new item that might be of interest to navigate. Nevertheless, I'm very pleased to hear the public engagement, the transit riders. We're also, being on the bus, engaging with the transit riders. I think that's positive. I was really impressed that the staff was actually a part of this, because sometimes I think we might rely on consultants, to give us data, and they do great from statistical data, but this was actually including the staff, and so I just appreciated that aspect as well. One of the things that I saw, and it was at the bottom, and of course, it kind of hurt my heart a little bit, where it talked about improve access to stops. And so when I hear the word access, I think of ADA. And so of all that list, ADA was at the bottom. And so that's something that I think that, and I don't know who took the polls, but I think ADA is something that we must plan for. And so that's my comments.
Thank you. Any other comments?
One question I have is, the goal of the increased ridership doubling in 10 years. Is that being tracked in the alternatives and, all the thinking that's going into how we revise the system?
Yes, I would say one of the explicit goals is to create a system that has the service levels that will enable a doubling of our ridership. Another factor, so Yes, so increasing frequency is a big piece of that. It's a clear winner in terms of improving and increasing ridership levels, but also zero fare is another way that communities across the country are really taking a hard look at reevaluating their transit systems. And the preliminary estimates we're seeing from communities who have transitioned in the last 10 years or transitioning now is we could expect 40 to 60 to 70% ridership increases, and sometimes it's usually pretty quick. There's a quick increase when the fares are eliminated, and then there's been a steady increase in the data I've seen. So I think those two things, and providing the service at the right locations, is also another piece of it. So it's that market analysis that we did is not just telling us where our transit riders are at now, but also where are our potential transit riders at, and providing the right level of service at the right places would also go a long way towards helping us reach that goal.
Yeah, I mean, we're not spread out over the 25 square miles of Iowa City evenly, so.
Right.
I mean, there are inherent advantages to try to improve, in my mind, improve service where you have the higher densities. You know, so it's, and then also projected growth. You know, we had a presentation by staff recently about where can we anticipate, at least potentially, where within the current limits of Iowa City now can we expect to see growth, and at what levels? And I was astonished to hear that over, I think, 50% of our potential growth within the city limits is within the riverfront crossings area. Right. So, I mean, in terms of looking ahead, the way in which our population is distributed in Iowa City could change dramatically. So how that might be reflected in at least our understanding of our mobility options, of which transit is one of them.
Right. I think to that point specifically, you see an increased level of service on Gilbert Street, specifically to help carry that forecasted growth from Riverfront Crossings District into the downtown. So you'll see that theme throughout.
Okay.
Just say real quick as we wrap this up, as you start to plan ahead for your deliberations on this, this is probably one of those very rare items that will require a special meeting of council. We'll see how it all comes to be at the end, but I don't think this is the type of item that you would put on an agenda and ask folks to come and, you know, wait an hour or two for that agenda item to be called. You're probably going to look at a special work session, maybe two, to be able to fully receive the report, allow the public to receive the report, and then I fully expect there will be a lot of public comment on this, and probably a lot of emotion behind that public comment. So we'll have to get into that as the report wraps up, but as we look into summer and fall, just know that we may need some special meetings when the full, I'd say when the full council's here to be able to fully consider that and take that public input.
Anything else?
With respect to languages, I think there are ways to approach it even now, which could include reaching out to certain community leaders or community groups, the Sudanese community, the Congolese community, others, if we have reason to believe that they've been in particular underrepresented and they are probably heavy users of the community. I think there are still also ways to ameliorate that.
I can help you on that for both communities if you want to.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes. All right, let's move on to clarification of agenda items.
I have notes here about item 9H and 9I, which are the parking restrictions in on Raven Street and Elm Ridge. I had some questions about that, so I don't know if perhaps pulling them from the consent calendar so we could discuss them separately.
We can certainly do that. Is there anything you want to mention now?
Well, I'm concerned with the process and that was taken in terms of outreach and engagement with those residents on those two streets, and understanding better what that process was.
We certainly received a lot of emails from residents, so I think it would be logical to pull it and discuss it.
And that would be 9G and H. Wait,
H and
H and I.
H and I.
I guess head up, I will be recuse myself from item number 14. Kansas Center for Work, I guess this is one of the beneficial.
Okay. Any other items? I did just want to mention, not to get in any discussion on item 11C, which is 12 East Court Street. I want to just mention to the counselors that you may have received 4 potential amendments to the resolution before you. So this might be your first time kind of seeing the language, just to look over it, see if there's any concerns with the language. We will navigate that in our meeting, but I just at least wanted to mention that before we go into the meeting. But of course, discussions on any of this, I really think we should wait for the public so that they can hear it as well.
Sure.
All right. Seeing there is nothing else on the formal agenda. Info packet for February 6th.
I just mentioned IP3, the budget compliance document. There's a lot of, if you take a few minutes even just to skim through that, there's a lot of information there. You know, just property valuations, largest property taxpayers, et cetera. Just, there's a lot of really good statistics in there. And I think especially if you go back, I don't know, how long have we been doing this, Jeff? Has this been a long time, annual thing?
I don't
10 or
know. I'd
12
have to
years?
defer to the finance staff on that.
We started that when we adopted the new debt management policy.
Okay.
I'm guessing that was about 4 years ago, maybe.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Dennis. But I think if you go back and look at it annually, and just kind of look at them side by side and do some comparison, it just gives you a good idea of how some of these statistics change in terms of, you know, our valuations and, you know, our gross numbers in terms of property taxes, et cetera. So it's definitely worth spending a little time on.
Yep. All right, moving on to IP for February 13th.
Just a reminder, IP6, is the whole council involved in that meeting tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, so I thought from 3 to 5, so with the school district on the form-based code. So just a reminder to everybody.
Anything else from IP? February 13th? All right, moving on to council updates on assigned boards, commissions, and committees. And if I am correct, we're going to start with Councilor Burgess today.
All right, well, you know, I serve on the board for the UNESCO City of Literature. And the One Book, Two Book Festival is happening this weekend. There is a banquet recognizing student authors on Friday evening, and then festivities all day Saturday, and then additional student authors speaking on Sunday at McBride Auditorium. So definitely check out the City of Literature's website for the schedule of that, but that I think was the majority of what we've covered in our last meeting. And also the serve on the ICAD board, and we have the State of the Schools informational session on the 27th at the Englert, which is just an update for the entire community. Any member of the public is welcome to attend that. But
Nothing for me.
Okay.
Nothing for me either. Haven't met.
Yeah, nothing for me, haven't met.
Nothing for me.
I sat in on a meeting of the Police Community Review Board, or at least the portion of it that I could sit in on before they went into executive session, just to have a chance to meet the people and introduce myself as the liaison. Yeah, good.
All right. And there's nothing for me except I will be a part of the One Book, Two Book on Sunday, and so looking forward to that opportunity. So,
Great.
Yeah. If there is nothing else, then we will see you at 7.
Oh, done on time.
Yes.